The morning fog hung like a shroud over Chesapeake Bay when Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez first spotted the anomaly on his radar screen. A 42-foot sportfisher, running dark without transponder signals, cutting through restricted waters at precisely 3:47 hours. What made his blood run cold wasn't the vessel's presence. Smugglers were common enough in these waters, but its trajectory. The boat was heading directly toward Naval Air Station Patuxent River, home to the Navy's most classified test flight programs. Rodriguez keyed his radio with practiced urgency. Cutter decisive, this is Lookout Station 7. We have a potential code yellow, bearing 270 degrees, range 4 nautical miles from restricted airspace perimeter. His voice carried the weight of 15 years patrolling these waters, but something felt different about this intercept. The boat's movement patterns were too precise, too deliberate for ordinary smuggling operations. Within minutes, the Coast Guard cutter Decisive was powering through choppy waters, her twin diesel engines roaring at full throttle. Captain Janet Kowalski stood on the bridge, her weathered hands gripping the rail as she studied the target through binoculars. The mysterious vessel maintained course and speed, seemingly oblivious to the approaching law enforcement presence. Or worse, completely unconcerned by it. "Range closing to 1,000 yards, Captain," reported Petty Officer Williams from the helm. "Should we initiate standard warning protocols?" Kowalski nodded grimly. This close to Pax River they couldn't take chances. Too many sensitive aircraft operations, too many secrets that foreign agents would kill for. Light her up. Full illumination, warning sirens, the works. The morning darkness exploded into brilliant white light as the cutter's searchlights bathed the smaller vessel. Air horns echoed across the water in the internationally recognized pattern for heave to and prepare for boarding. Standard procedure demanded the target vessel reduce speed and signal compliance. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The Sportfisher's engines suddenly throttled down to idle, and a single spotlight flickered on from her stern, but not in surrender. The light beam swept in a precise pattern across the water, 3 long flashes, 2 short, 3 long again, SOS in Morse code. But that wasn't what made Captain Kowalski's heart skip. The light pattern continued, dash dot dash dot dot dash dot dot dash. The letters MAV, followed by a number sequence she recognized from classified briefings she'd attended at the Pentagon just months earlier. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, lowering her binoculars. "All stop. Kill the lights and sirens immediately." "Ma'am," Williams turned, confusion evident in his young face. "You heard me, Petty Officer. Stand down from intercept operations. We're not dealing with smugglers." Something far more dangerous, and infinitely more interesting, was playing out in the pre-dawn darkness of Chesapeake Bay. The Sportfisher continued its steady approach toward the naval facility, its occupant apparently unaware that she had just prevented what could have been a catastrophic case of friendly fire. Or perhaps she was entirely aware, and that knowledge was exactly what made her so formidable. As the Coast Guard vessel fell back to a respectful distance, Captain Kowalski reached for her secure radio. This was going to require phone calls to very important people who definitely didn't want to be woken up at 4 in the morning. But the alternative, allowing an unknown vessel to penetrate naval airspace, was unthinkable. The fog began to lift as dawn approached, revealing the true scope of what they were dealing with. The woman piloting that boat wasn't just any smuggler or foreign operative. She was someone who knew military protocols well enough to communicate in code, someone important enough to make a Coast Guard captain think twice about standard interdiction procedures. And she was heading straight for one of America's most sensitive military installations, with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Lieutenant Commander Zara Phoenix Blackwood killed the engines of her borrowed Sportfisher as she approached the familiar waters surrounding Pax River. The Coast Guard intercept had gone exactly as she'd anticipated, a carefully choreographed dance of military protocols that would buy her the credibility she needed for what came next. The MAV identification code she'd transmitted was legitimate, though obtaining it had required calling in favors from people who owed her more than they cared to admit. 24 hours earlier, she'd been sitting in a congressional hearing room, facing a panel of politicians who'd already decided her fate before she'd spoken a single word. The charges were serious: disobeying direct orders, endangering military personnel, and recklessly pursuing unauthorized combat engagement. The real crime, she knew, was being right when her superiors had been catastrophically wrong. The hearing had been a masterpiece of political theater. Senators who'd never worn a uniform lectured her about military discipline, while cameras captured every moment for the evening news. They'd painted her as a rogue pilot whose cowboy mentality had compromised a crucial mission in the South China Sea. What they hadn't mentioned was that her unauthorized engagement had prevented a Chinese submarine from sinking an entire carrier battle group. Commander Blackwood, Senator Richardson had intoned with practiced gravitas, your service record shows a disturbing pattern of insubordination. Can you explain to this committee why you consistently believe your judgment supersedes that of your commanding officers? Zara had met his gaze without flinching. Senator, my judgment has kept more American servicemen alive than your committee's policies have. Sometimes the right decision isn't the authorized decision. The room had erupted in partisan chaos. Headlines were already being written: disgraced Navy pilot defies Congress, military discipline crisis exposed in Senate hearings. By evening, she'd been stripped of her command and placed on indefinite administrative leave pending a full military tribunal. But Zara Blackwood hadn't survived 3 tours in hostile airspace by accepting defeat gracefully. She'd built her reputation on finding solutions when everyone else saw only problems. And right now, America faced a problem that required someone willing to operate outside normal channels. The intelligence had come through back-channel sources, former colleagues who'd watched her get railroaded and knew the real stakes involved. A Chinese advanced reconnaissance aircraft, designation unknown, was conducting systematic overflights of American naval facilities along the eastern seaboard. Standard intercept protocols had failed repeatedly. The aircraft possessed stealth capabilities that rendered conventional radar nearly useless, and its speed envelope exceeded anything in the current American inventory. More troubling was the pattern emerging from satellite imagery analysis. Each overflight lasted exactly 17 minutes and focused on specific sections of naval installations that housed America's most sensitive aviation research programs. Someone was mapping defense capabilities with surgical precision, preparing for something much larger than routine intelligence gathering. The Pentagon's response had been predictably bureaucratic: form committees, request budget increases, and deploy existing assets that everyone already knew were inadequate. Meanwhile, Chinese intelligence gathered information that could compromise American naval superiority for decades. Zara had tried working through proper channels first. She'd submitted detailed analysis to her former commanding officer, outlining intercept strategies that might succeed where conventional approaches had failed. The response had been swift and dismissive. Commander Blackwood is currently under administrative review and lacks authorization to participate in operational planning. So she'd chosen a different approach. The Sportfisher belonged to a retired Marine colonel who'd served with her father in Vietnam. The boat's modifications weren't immediately visible: enhanced communications equipment, military-grade navigation systems, and cargo space specifically designed for transporting sensitive equipment. What she needed now was access to the kind of aircraft that could challenge an unknown Chinese stealth reconnaissance platform. The morning mist revealed the distinctive silhouettes of Pax River's test flight facilities. Somewhere in those hangars sat experimental aircraft that existed only in classified budget documents and the nightmares of foreign intelligence services. Getting access would require convincing people who had every reason to distrust her that America's security was worth risking their careers. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from a source inside the Pentagon. Overfly confirmed for 1400 hours today. NAS Norfolk primary target. Your window is closing fast. As Coast Guard vessels maintained their respectful distance, Zara Blackwood prepared to either save her country or destroy what remained of her military career. In her experience, the two options were often indistinguishable. The security checkpoint at Naval Air Station Patuxent River had processed thousands of visitors over the years, but Master Chief Petty Officer Robert Tank Morrison had never encountered anyone quite like the woman who just stepped off the civilian boat that had caused such a commotion with the Coast Guard. She moved with the controlled precision of a career military officer, but her civilian clothes and mysterious arrival suggested something far more complicated. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification," Tank said, his voice carrying the authority of 22 years in the Navy. The woman smiled, not the nervous expression of someone trying to talk their way past security, but the confident look of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She reached into her jacket and produced a leather wallet, opening it to reveal credentials that made Tank's eyebrows rise. Special Forces identification, current as of last month, with security clearances that required him to step into his booth and make several phone calls to verify. The name on the ID read, LT, Commander Zara Blackwood, followed by codes that Tank recognized as relating to highly classified aviation programs. "Commander, I'm going to need you to wait here while I verify these credentials," Tank said, but his tone had shifted from suspicious to respectful. Whatever this woman's story was, her paperwork was legitimate enough to make a Master Chief think twice about standard procedures. "Of course, Master Chief," Zara replied, her voice carrying just enough Southern accent to suggest roots somewhere in the Carolinas. "Take all the time you need. I understand this is irregular." While Tank made his calls, Zara studied the familiar surroundings of America's premier naval test flight facility. She'd been stationed here early in her career, back when she was just another hotshot pilot trying to prove herself in a male-dominated field. The base had changed since then: new hangars, upgraded security systems, and aircraft that pushed the boundaries of what she'd thought possible. But some things remained constant: the smell of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid that permeated everything, the distant roar of engines being pushed to their limits on test flights, the sense that this place existed at the bleeding edge of military technology, where theoretical engineering became operational reality. "Commander Blackwood," Tank had returned, his expression unreadable but his body language suggesting that his phone calls had yielded interesting results. "I've been instructed to escort you to Hangar 7. Someone wants to speak with you." They drove across the base in silence, past flight lines filled with aircraft that officially didn't exist. Zara recognized some of them from classified briefings: experimental fighters, reconnaissance platforms, and technology demonstrators that represented billions of dollars in research and development. Each one was a potential solution to the problem she'd come here to address, but only if she could convince the right people to listen. Hangar 7 was smaller than the others, set apart from the main flight operations area and surrounded by additional security measures that suggested its contents were even more sensitive than usual. As they approached, Zara noticed the complete absence of identifying markings on the building: no unit designations, no warning signs, nothing that would indicate what kind of work took place inside. "Ma'am, I'm instructed to take you only to the entrance," Tank said as they reached the hangar doors. "Someone will meet you inside." The interior of Hangar 7 was dimly lit, filled with the controlled chaos of an active aircraft maintenance facility. But as Zara's eyes adjusted, she realized she was looking at something extraordinary: an aircraft unlike anything she'd ever seen, even in the most classified briefings. Its design suggested capabilities that bordered on science fiction: variable geometry wings, advanced composite materials, and engine configurations that defied conventional understanding. Impressive, isn't it? The voice came from behind her, belonging to a man in civilian clothes whose bearing immediately identified him as senior military leadership. Though I suspect you didn't break about 6 different regulations getting here just to admire our latest toy. Zara turned to face Colonel James Stryker Harrison, a legend in the test pilot community whose career had paralleled the development of America's most advanced aircraft. She'd never met him personally, but every naval aviator knew his reputation: a pilot's pilot who'd successfully tested aircraft that had killed less capable men. "Colonel Harrison, thank you for seeing me," she said, extending her hand. "I assume you know why I'm here." "Let's say I know enough to be curious," Harrison replied, his grip firm and appraising. "A disgraced pilot shows up unannounced at our most secure facility, claiming to have information about Chinese reconnaissance overflights that our entire intelligence apparatus has been struggling to address. Either you're exactly the kind of outside-the-box thinking we need, or you're having a very public nervous breakdown." Zara met his gaze steadily. "Colonel, in 6 hours, a Chinese aircraft is going to overfly Norfolk Naval Base using stealth technology that makes our current intercept capabilities look like World War II vintage. Every minute we spend on protocol is another minute they have to map our defensive weaknesses. And you think you have a solution?" She turned back toward the experimental aircraft dominating the hangar. "I think that bird behind me represents our only chance of finding out what we're really dealing with." Colonel Harrison studied her for a long moment, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Finally, he spoke. "Commander, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this hangar. That aircraft is the Phantom, the most advanced stealth interceptor ever built. It's also completely untested in actual combat conditions and politically radioactive enough to end careers just by being associated with it." "What's its performance envelope?" "Classified. But hypothetically speaking, if such an aircraft existed, it might be capable of matching or exceeding the performance characteristics of any known Chinese reconnaissance platform." Zara felt her pulse quicken. "Hypothetically speaking, Colonel, how long would it take to prep such an aircraft for an intercept mission?" "For an experienced test pilot with appropriate clearances, about 4 hours. And for a disgraced naval aviator with questionable judgment and a tendency toward insubordination." Harrison's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the ghost of a smile that suggested he'd already made his decision. "Commander, I think you and I need to have a very detailed conversation about this hypothetical Chinese reconnaissance aircraft. And then we need to discuss whether you're insane enough to climb into an experimental fighter that officially doesn't exist to intercept a target that our government claims isn't there." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Hangar 7 as Colonel Harrison led Zara through the most comprehensive aircraft briefing of her career. The X-47D Phantom represented 15 years of bleeding-edge research, incorporating technology that pushed the boundaries of materials science, aerodynamics, and electronic warfare capabilities. Every system had been designed to operate in contested airspace against opponents using the most advanced counter-detection measures available. "The propulsion system uses adaptive cycle technology," Harrison explained, his voice taking on the reverent tone that test pilots reserved for truly exceptional aircraft. "Variable geometry intake allows optimization for both supersonic cruise and low observable operations. Maximum speed is classified, but let's say it's adequate for your purposes." Zara ran her hands along the aircraft's composite fuselage, feeling the almost organic curves that scattered radar energy in carefully calculated directions. The surface was unlike anything she'd encountered, not quite metal, not quite ceramic, but something that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "What about weapons systems?" Internal Bay carries 4 AIM-260 Joint Advanced Tactical Missiles, still in development, but they make our current air-to-air missiles look primitive. Range classified, but significantly beyond anything the Chinese currently deploy. The real advantage is the sensor package. Harrison activated a portable display unit, revealing the Phantom's most impressive capability. The AN/APG-85 radar can track stealth targets at ranges that would have been impossible 5 years ago. It uses artificial intelligence algorithms to predict target behavior and automatically adjusts scanning parameters to maintain lock, even against the most sophisticated countermeasures. "What's the catch?" Zara asked, because there was always a catch with experimental aircraft. "Several, actually," Harrison admitted. "First, this aircraft has exactly 47 hours of test flight time, all conducted in carefully controlled conditions. Second, the AI systems are still learning. They perform beautifully in simulation, but we don't know how they'll react to actual combat stress. Third, if this mission goes sideways, neither of us will have careers to worry about because we'll be in federal prison." The hangar doors opened to admit a small convoy of vehicles carrying ground crew and support personnel. Zara noticed that none of them wore standard military uniforms. Everyone was dressed in civilian clothes, suggesting that this operation existed in the gray area between official Pentagon programs and plausible deniability. "One more thing," Harrison said as technicians began pre-flight preparations. "The Chinese aircraft we're dealing with isn't just conducting reconnaissance. Our intelligence analysts believe it's testing American response capabilities, mapping radar coverage, identifying intercept patterns, cataloging our defensive weaknesses. Each overflight is an examination, and we've been failing the test." Zara absorbed this information while studying the mission planning materials Harrison provided. The Chinese aircraft's flight patterns showed sophisticated understanding of American air defense networks, exploiting gaps that shouldn't have been detectable to foreign intelligence. Someone with detailed knowledge of U.S. military capabilities was providing targeting information. "Are we looking at a mole situation?" she asked. "Possible, but that's above both our pay grades," Harrison replied. "Our job is to get close enough to this thing to gather actionable intelligence, maybe force it to reveal capabilities it's been keeping hidden." The mission parameters were straightforward in concept, but terrifyingly complex in execution. The Chinese aircraft typically approach from international waters, accelerated to high supersonic speeds while maintaining radio silence, conducted its 17-minute reconnaissance pattern over the target facility, then disappeared back into international airspace before American interceptors could establish meaningful contact. "Time on target needs to be precise," Harrison continued. "Too early and they'll detect our presence and abort. Too late and they'll complete their mission and vanish. We get one shot at this." Zara studied the flight plan, noting the narrow window for intercept and the demanding performance requirements. The mission would require flying at the absolute limits of both aircraft and pilot capabilities, with no margin for error and no possibility of backup if things went wrong. "What about support?" she asked. "None. Officially, this mission isn't happening. No AWACS, no tanker support, no rescue assets. You'll be completely on your own from takeoff to landing." As the afternoon progressed, Zara found herself strapping into the most advanced aircraft she'd ever encountered. The Phantom's cockpit represented the future of military aviation. Displays that responded to eye movement, flight controls that adapted to pilot input patterns, and artificial intelligence systems that could process information faster than human cognition allowed. "Remember," Harrison's voice crackled through her headset during final systems checks, "this aircraft wants to be flown aggressively. The AI systems perform better when pushed to their limits. Don't try to baby it. Trust the technology and fly like your life depends on it." "Copy that," Zara replied, her hands moving through pre-flight checklists with practiced efficiency. Because it probably does. The Phantom's engine spooled up with a sound unlike anything in conventional aircraft, a deep, almost subsonic rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones rather than her ears. Advanced noise suppression technology made the aircraft nearly silent from the outside, but inside the cockpit, she could feel the raw power waiting to be unleashed. As she taxied toward the runway, Zara reflected on the chain of events that had brought her to this moment. 24 hours ago, she'd been a disgraced pilot facing the end of her military career. Now she was about to test Fly America's most secret aircraft on a mission that could either vindicate her or destroy any chance of redemption. The tower cleared her for takeoff, using code words that wouldn't appear in any official records. As the Phantom accelerated down the runway, Zara felt the familiar sensation of gravity pressing her into her seat, but magnified beyond anything she'd experienced. This aircraft didn't just fly. It dominated the air around it with technological superiority that bordered on supernatural. At rotation speed, the Phantom lifted off with a grace that defied its angular appearance, climbing at an angle that would have been impossible for conventional fighters. As Pax River fell away beneath her, Zara Blackwood prepared to either make the most important interception of her career or become another test pilot casualty in an aircraft that officially didn't exist. The mission clock showed 37 minutes until the predicted Chinese overflight of Norfolk Naval Base, time enough to position herself for an intercept that would either change everything or end everything. Climbing through 20,000 feet at twice the speed of sound, Zara began to understand why the Phantom had been kept so secret. This wasn't just an advanced fighter. It was a paradigm shift in military aviation, representing capabilities that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in aerial warfare. The question was whether she could master its systems quickly enough to complete a mission that conventional aircraft had repeatedly failed to accomplish. The AI systems were already beginning to map potential intercept geometries, displaying tactical options with a sophistication that seemed almost prescient. For the first time in months, Zara allowed herself to believe that this mission might actually succeed. But first, she had to find an enemy aircraft that had consistently evaded America's most advanced detection systems, an aircraft that might be more dangerous than anyone realized. At 45,000 feet and climbing, the Phantom sliced through the upper atmosphere with a silence that belied its tremendous speed. Zara monitored the artificial intelligence systems as they processed incoming data streams, building a three-dimensional tactical picture that updated in real time. The technology was so advanced it felt like cheating, or would have, if the opposition weren't equally sophisticated. Phoenix 1, Norfolk approach, came the coded transmission through her encrypted communications system. Package delivery confirmed on schedule. 15 minutes to target window. Phoenix 1 copies, she responded, using the call sign that had defined her career since her first combat deployment in the Persian Gulf. The nickname had originally been Mockery, Phoenix, because she kept getting shot down and somehow surviving. After the third incident, her squadron mates had grudgingly admitted that maybe she was just too stubborn to die. Now, flying the most advanced aircraft in American inventory, the call sign felt more prophetic than ironic. She was about to either rise from the ashes of her ruined career or crash and burn in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The Phantom's sensors began detecting electromagnetic anomalies consistent with stealth aircraft operations. The signatures were faint, barely distinguishable from background radiation, but the AI systems highlighted patterns that human analysis would have missed entirely. Something was approaching from the northeast, moving at high altitude and tremendous speed while maintaining emissions control that rendered it nearly invisible. Contact bearing 045 degrees, range approximately 60 nautical miles, Zara reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surge. Signature matches predicted parameters for unknown reconnaissance aircraft. The tactical display updated continuously, as the Phantom sensors gathered more information about their target. What emerged was a picture of an aircraft that challenged every assumption about Chinese technological capabilities. The radar signature was smaller than a conventional fighter, but moved with performance characteristics that exceeded anything in known inventories. Phoenix 1, your discretion on intercept profile, came Harrison's voice from Pax River. Remember, intelligence gathering is primary objective. Avoid engagement unless directly threatened. Understood, Zara replied, but she was already calculating intercept angles that would allow maximum data collection while maintaining tactical advantage. The Chinese aircraft was following its predicted approach pattern, but something felt different about this overflight. The timing was more aggressive. The altitude profile suggested higher confidence in stealth capabilities. At 35 nautical miles, the Phantom's enhanced sensors achieved partial lock on the target. The Chinese aircraft was unlike anything in American intelligence databases, larger than expected, with engine signatures that suggested hybrid propulsion technology. Most troubling were the electronic emissions patterns, which indicated active sensor systems far more sophisticated than reconnaissance platforms typically carried. Phoenix 1, I'm reading unusual electromagnetic activity from your target. Harrison's voice carried new tension. Are you detecting weapons radar? Zara checked her displays, feeling her blood pressure spike as the artificial intelligence systems confirmed her worst fears. Affirmative, Pax River. Target is radiating fire control radar and appears to be carrying external weapons pylons. This isn't a reconnaissance mission. They're testing our response to armed incursion. The tactical situation had just shifted from intelligence gathering to potential combat engagement. The Chinese aircraft wasn't just mapping American defenses. It was probing for weaknesses while armed with weapons that could exploit any vulnerabilities it discovered. Phoenix 1, break off intercept and return to base immediately, Harrison ordered. This is now a matter for diplomatic channels. But Zara was already closing to visual range, and what she saw through the Phantom's enhanced optics made diplomatic solutions seem hopelessly naive. The Chinese aircraft, designated J-35 according to her intelligence briefings, was indeed carrying weapons, but more than that, it was demonstrating flight characteristics that suggested technological capabilities beyond American estimates. Negative on the abort, Pax River, she responded. This aircraft is collecting targeting data on Norfolk's primary facilities. If I break off now, they complete their mission with impunity. Commander, you are not authorized for engagement. But authorization had become irrelevant. The Chinese aircraft had detected her approach and was maneuvering in ways that no reconnaissance platform should have been capable of. Vector changes that pulled more G-forces than human pilots could sustain, acceleration profiles that suggested thrust-to-weight ratios that American engineers had deemed impossible. The J-35 was also jamming her communications with Norfolk, using electronic warfare systems that shouldn't have been mounted on a reconnaissance aircraft. Every assumption about this mission had been wrong, and now Zara found herself in aerial combat with an opponent whose capabilities were completely unknown. Phoenix 1 declaring hostile intent, she transmitted, hopping someone was receiving through the jamming. Engaging in self-defense. The Chinese pilot was good, better than intelligence estimates had suggested possible. The J-35 climbed at angles that defied conventional aerodynamics while deploying countermeasures that temporarily blinded even the Phantom's advanced sensors. But the American aircraft's AI systems were learning in real time, adapting to tactics they'd never encountered before. As the two stealth fighters began their deadly dance at 50,000 feet above the Virginia coast, Zara realized this wasn't just an intercept mission anymore. This was the first engagement between America's most secret aircraft and China's latest technological achievement, a test that would determine which nation's aviation technology would dominate the skies for the next generation. And she was fighting alone in an untested aircraft against an enemy pilot who seemed as determined to avoid capture as she was to prevent espionage. The engagement envelope collapsed to knife-fighting range as both aircraft maneuvered for tactical advantage, their stealth capabilities negated by proximity and active sensors. In the crystalline atmosphere above the Chesapeake Bay, two nations' most advanced military technologies were about to be tested in the most unforgiving laboratory imaginable: actual combat. The first missile launch came without warning, a heat-seeking projectile that appeared on Zara's threat display with the calm announcement "Missile inbound" from the Phantom's artificial intelligence. She pulled into a vertical climb that would have torn the wings off a conventional fighter, the experimental aircraft's structure groaning under stresses that pushed composite materials to their theoretical limits. "Flares, flares, flares," she called out, more from ingrained habit than necessity. The Phantom's countermeasure systems had already deployed advanced decoys that created false thermal signatures, while her aircraft maneuvered through a barrel roll that no human pilot should have survived. The G-forces should have rendered her unconscious, but the Phantom's advanced life support systems maintained blood flow to her brain through pressure suit inflation that felt like being squeezed by a mechanical vice. The Chinese missile passed harmlessly through the decoy pattern, but the engagement was far from over. The J-35 had maneuvered for a follow-up shot, demonstrating pilot skills that suggested extensive combat training rather than routine reconnaissance operations. This was no intelligence-gathering mission. This was a combat test, with American lives as the stakes. "Phoenix 1, what's your status?" Harrison's voice broke through the electronic jamming, barely audible over the static. "Engaged with hostile aircraft over Norfolk approach," Zara responded while simultaneously tracking the J-35's position and calculating firing solutions. "This bird is carrying active combat loads and demonstrating air superiority mission profile." "Rules of engagement." "Already past that point," she replied, squeezing the trigger that sent two AIM-260 missiles toward the Chinese aircraft. The advanced weapons separated from the Phantom's internal bay with mechanical precision, their rocket motors igniting in sequence that eliminated the infrared signature bloom that might have compromised her position. The J-35 pilot was better than she'd expected. The enemy aircraft rolled into a split-S maneuver that brought it diving toward the deck while deploying countermeasures that confused her missile's guidance systems. Both American weapons detonated harmlessly in clouds of chaff and electronic noise, their target already maneuvering for another attack run. But the engagement had revealed crucial intelligence about Chinese capabilities. The J-35's performance parameters exceeded every estimate in classified briefings, suggesting technological advances that American intelligence had completely missed. Worse, the pilot's tactical proficiency indicated extensive training in air-to-air combat against American aircraft, training that could only have come from detailed knowledge of U.S. fighter capabilities. "Phoenix 1, Norfolk Tower reports radar contact with your engagement," Harrison transmitted. "You have approximately 4 minutes before conventional interceptors arrive on station." 4 minutes to either end this engagement or find herself explaining to F-22 pilots why she was flying an aircraft that didn't officially exist while engaging an enemy that diplomatic channels would deny had ever entered American airspace. The political ramifications were staggering, but the immediate tactical situation demanded complete focus. The Chinese pilot had made a mistake in his last maneuver, trading altitude for speed in a way that left him vulnerable to energy tactics. Zara pushed the Phantom's throttles to military power and climbed aggressively, using the aircraft's superior thrust-to-weight ratio to gain the high ground in three-dimensional aerial combat. At 60,000 feet, she rolled inverted and dove toward the J-35, which was attempting to escape toward international waters. The Chinese aircraft was fast, but the Phantom was faster, and its AI systems were predicting intercept geometries with inhuman precision. Every tactical option appeared on her helmet display in real time, overlaid with probability calculations that turned aerial combat into applied mathematics. Firing solution achieved, the AI announced in its emotionless synthetic voice. Target locked, range optimal, countermeasures minimal. But as Zara prepared to fire, something made her hesitate. The J-35 wasn't trying to escape. It was leading her away from populated areas, drawing the engagement over open water where collateral damage would be minimal. Either the Chinese pilot had unexpected concern for civilian casualties, or this was a trap designed to separate her from any potential support. The answer came as her radar warning receiver exploded with new contacts. Two more J-35s had appeared from nowhere, rising from sea level where they'd been masked by radar clutter and ocean returns. The reconnaissance mission had been cover for something much more dangerous, a combat air patrol specifically designed to test American response capabilities. Now she faced 3 advanced enemy aircraft in an experimental fighter that had never been tested in multi-threat scenarios. The odds had just shifted from challenging to suicidal, but retreat would mean allowing Chinese combat aircraft to operate freely in American airspace. Phoenix 1, multiple hostiles detected on peripheral sensors, Harrison warned unnecessarily. Recommend immediate egress to friendly airspace. But Zara was already maneuvering for the fight of her life, using every trick learned in 3 combat tour and 15 years of military aviation. The Phantom systems were performing flawlessly, but she was about to discover whether American technology could overcome Chinese numerical superiority. In the distance, she could see the contrails of F-22s climbing to intercept, but they were still minutes away. Minutes she might not have against 3 enemy aircraft whose capabilities remained largely unknown. The furball that developed over the Chesapeake Bay would have been impossible to follow on conventional radar. 3 Chinese J-35s and 1 American X-47D Phantom maneuvered through vertical and horizontal space in patterns that defied traditional fighter tactics, their stealth capabilities negated by active sensors and proximity, while advanced electronic warfare systems created a bubble of electromagnetic chaos that blinded ground-based observers. Zara found herself fighting the kind of engagement that military strategists had theorized about but never experienced, beyond visual range combat between aircraft whose radar signatures were smaller than birds, but whose performance capabilities exceeded anything in previous warfare. The Phantom's artificial intelligence systems were working overtime, processing threat data and calculating defensive maneuvers faster than human reaction time allowed. Multiple missile launches detected, the AI announced with the same calm tone it might use to report fuel consumption. Recommend immediate defensive maneuvering. She pulled the Phantom through a knife-edge turn that subjected both aircraft and pilot to stresses that pushed the boundaries of material science. 4 Chinese missiles streaked past her position, their proximity fuses detonating in sequence that filled her peripheral vision with explosive flashes. The advanced countermeasure systems were working, but she couldn't keep evading forever against 3 opponents. Time to change the rules of engagement. Phoenix 1 going offensive, she transmitted, hopping someone was monitoring despite the electronic jamming. Weapons hot, engaging multiple hostiles. The Phantom's internal weapons bay had been designed for exactly this scenario. 2 AIM-260 missiles launched simultaneously, their guidance systems coordinating targeting solutions to prevent mutual interference. The Chinese pilots reacted exactly as she'd hoped, breaking formation to evade, which created windows of vulnerability that the AI systems immediately exploited. 1 J-35 took a direct hit amidships, its pilot ejecting milliseconds before the aircraft disintegrated in a fireball that briefly outshone the afternoon sun. The remaining two Chinese fighters maneuvered aggressively, their pilots demonstrating skills that suggested extensive training specifically for this type of engagement. But they'd made the mistake of underestimating both the Phantom's capabilities and the pilot flying it. Zara had earned her call sign by surviving situations where survival should have been impossible, and this engagement was just another test of her refusal to accept defeat. The second J-35 fell to a long-range shot that caught the Chinese pilot during a climbing turn, the AIM-260's advanced guidance system maintaining lock despite countermeasures that should have broken target acquisition. The explosion was smaller this time. The missile had detonated the enemy aircraft's fuel supply rather than its warhead, creating a controlled destruction that suggested the American weapons were more precise than their Chinese counterparts. That left one J-35, its pilot now flying with the desperate aggression of someone who realized his technological advantage had evaporated.